Hey guys, tonight we're gliding into something a little greener. A world of floating gardens, clever crops, and plants that basically look after themselves. We're exploring the genius of the Aztec chinampas. Gardens so perfectly designed, weeds never had a chance. Forget modern lawns and backbreaking weeding. The truth is, you probably wouldn't survive a day trying to maintain one of these. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's floating along with us, from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The chinampas, those legendary floating gardens, look ghostly at dawn. Each one is a neat rectangle of green, hemmed in by rows of slender willow trees, whose roots reach down through woven reed walls into the dark water. The willows aren't just for looks. They anchor the whole thing in place, holding fast against storms and the occasional pushy canoe. You balance on a narrow earthen path, the kind that could fit maybe two people side by side, though here it's just you, the mist, and the soft lap of water. Somewhere to your right, you hear the steady splash of a paddle. A man is poling a narrow canoe down a canal, its hull gliding silently between the rows. His cargo is nothing glamorous: bundles of fresh green still wet from the morning dew, a heap of maize cobs with the husks folded back just enough to tempt a buyer. He nods at you in passing but says nothing. Words aren't much use across misty water anyway. Mainstream history will tell you that chinampas were an agricultural marvel, producing several harvests a year without exhausting the soil. That much is true, but what they rarely mention is how alive this landscape feels, like it's breathing. Even the mud here is busy, churned by unseen worms and fed by water plants breaking down beneath the surface. Here's a quirky bit. Some farmers swear the morning mist itself keeps weeds away. The mist watches, one old man mutters to you, deadpan, and you can't tell if it's a superstition, a joke, or both. You imagine tiny weed seedlings peeking up through the soil, spotting the mist, and deciding, nope, not today. Historians still argue whether the very first chinampas on Lake Texcoco came from Aztec ingenuity alone, or if they borrowed and perfected techniques from earlier cultures, like the Xochimilca. Either way, the design is brilliant. Shallow lake water turned into year-round farmland. Not by draining it, but by partnering with it. As the sun rises, the mist burns away in patches, revealing an orderly maze of green islands. Every so often, a ripple disturbs the mirror-like surface, and you wonder if it's just a fish or something else. Out here, the lake is a trickster. You might spot a floating log that turns out to be a turtle, or what you think is a clump of lilies suddenly unfolds into a duck. You follow a path toward the heart of the Chinampa zone, where farmers are already at work. One bends to check the leaves on a young tomato plant, brushing his fingers over them, like a parent smoothing a child's hair. Another squats by the edge, using a handmade rake to clear away drifting hyacinths before they clog the narrow canal. There's no roaring machinery, no metal plank, just water, wood, and human breath. It's farming in a whisper. In the distance, you catch a flicker of movement on the hills, volcanoes standing sentinel over the valley. They're quiet today, but you know they have a habit of reminding everyone who's really in charge. Be. It's strange how peaceful it feels, knowing all this rests in the palm of forces far bigger than you. You pause for a moment, listening. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a flute plays a slow, winding tune. The sound drifts over the water and mingles with the rustle of reeds. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. And when you open them, The sun has fully broken the horizon, the chinampas blazing in shades of gold and green. The workday has begun, and you're standing right in the middle of one of the quietest, most efficient farming systems the world has ever known, a place where weeds, somehow, are not invited to the party. You step forward along the narrow ridge, the lake glittering on both sides, and you start to notice just how perfectly straight some of these green rectangles are. From above, they'd look like a patchwork quilt sewn directly onto the water's surface. The edges are tidy, not by accident, but because generations of farmers have spent their lives shaping and reshaping them. The process begins with reeds, tall, hollow stalks that sway in the breeze like sleepy metronomes. You watch as a pair of farmers work in unison, pushing long poles into the soft lake bed, marking out the corners of a new chinampa. There's no shouting, no measuring tape, just an unhurried rhythm born from muscle memory. They lash horizontal beams between the poles, weaving reeds in and out to form low walls. It's almost like basket making, except the basket is the size of a small house and will hold not fruit, but an entire farm plot. One farmer wades into the shallows, mud curling around his calves, and starts piling lake sediment against the reed walls. The muck is thick and dark, with a smell somewhere between fresh rain and something your laundry machine wouldn't forgive you for. You probably hate the texture underfoot, but here it's liquid gold, nutrients, minerals, and organic matter in one slippery package. A more mainstream textbook might tell you the chinampas were man-made islands, but that makes them sound like something you could just order up in a week or two. In reality, it can take months before a new chinampa is ready to plant, with layer upon layer of mud and decaying vegetation built up until it's firm enough to walk on without sinking to your ankles. The willows along the edges start small, like saplings in polite formation, but within a few years, they'll knot their roots deep into the structure, keeping it from drifting or dissolving. And quirky detail for you. In the early stages, some farmers plant marigolds along the edges. They'll tell you it's for beauty, and it is, but it also keeps certain insects at bay. Plus, marigolds smell faintly like pepper and sunshine, which isn't bad company when you're ankle deep in lake muck. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs designed the chinampa system entirely as a farming solution, or partly as a strategic tool for controlling the lake's waterways. A tidy grid of anchored productive land also happens to funnel boat traffic in predictable patterns. Accidental? Maybe, but given how well organized the Aztec capital was, you suspect nothing here was left to chance. As you watch the new chinampa take shape, you start to appreciate how little waste there is. Everything has a place. The reeds become walls, and mud becomes soil. The trimmings from last season's maize stalks become compost to mix into the foundation. Even the canals between plots double as fish habitats and transport lanes. You can almost hear some medieval European farmer grumbling in envy from half a world away, muttering about flooded fields and endless weeding. The farmers break briefly for a meal: flat maize tortillas, fresh beans, and a dollop of chili paste. They perch on the edge of a half-built plot, legs dangling over the water, chatting in a mix of practical instructions and casual gossip. Hazard time. The smell of toasted maize drifts toward you, and for a moment, you forget you're here to work. You just want to sit and watch the day go by. A light breeze stirs the surface of the lake, carrying the faint sounds of other crews working farther off. The gentle clunk of poles against boat hulls, the rippling laughter of children ferrying snacks to their parents. It's a soundtrack so consistent, it might as well be built into the place. You notice how nobody hurries. Maybe it's because chinampa building is a craft that punishes impatience. Rush the walls, and they'll buckle. Plant too soon, and the soil will sink before roots can take hold. You crouch near one corner where the mud is piled high. A frog, shiny as if polished, sits on the edge, half in, half out of the water, watching you like you're the oddity here. Its throat inflates and deflates slowly, a living metronome. Behind it, a dragonfly hovers, its wings catching the sunlight in a flicker of copper and green. This is how a chinampa begins, not with noise and machines, but with patient layering, watchful eyes, and the quiet company of lake creatures. One of the farmers waves you over, gesturing toward a completed chinampa across the canal. From here, you see it's already alive with maize plants waist high, their leaves whispering in the wind. A few bean vines snake up the maize stalks, and at the base, broad squash leaves sprawl like lazy cats, shading the soil. This Three Sisters arrangement isn't just efficient, it's practically a self-sustaining dinner party, with each plant supporting the others. And still, not a weed in sight. You step into the waiting canoe, push off from the bank, and let the boat drift toward that green rectangle ahead. Somewhere beneath your feet, the lake keeps its slow secrets, and above, the sky has cleared to an impossible blue. You're heading deeper now, into the heart of the Chinampas, where the magic of weedless farming truly begins. Your canoe noses gently against the edge of the finished Chinampa, the hull rocking slightly as you step out onto soil that feels springy but solid, like standing on a living sponge. You glance down and notice how dark the earth is, almost black, and crumbly enough that it clings to your fingertips when you scoop up a handful. The farmer beside you grins knowingly and says, in a low voice as though sharing a family secret, "It's the mud and the mix." You follow him toward a small pile near the far corner, where fresh lake sediment has been dumped in a neat mound. He plunges a wooden shovel into it and flips over a slice. The inside is speckled with bits of decaying plants, tiny shells, and what looks suspiciously like shredded algae. This is the Chinampa's secret soil recipe, a blend of lake sediment, compost from last season's crop waste, and aquatic plants pulled from the canals. It's rich enough to make modern garden center bags blush with envy. More importantly, it's dense and moist, which makes it hard for most weeds to get a foothold. The surface is so fertile that anything growing here shoots up quickly, shading the ground before unwelcome seedlings have a chance. Mainstream historical accounts praise the productivity of Chinampas, 7 harvests a year, sometimes more, but they rarely go into the daily craft of soil maintenance. You watch as the farmer scoops up a load of muck and spreads it evenly between maize rows, using his foot to press it down just enough to keep it from washing away. When every few days, more of this lake-borne compost is added, constantly refreshing the surface like a freshly iced cake. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Aztec farmers swore by adding crushed freshwater snail shells to their mix, claiming it kept the earth awake and discouraged certain pests. Whether it worked or was just an excuse to eat more snails is anyone's guess, but the idea stuck around in oral tradition long after the empire fell. Historians still argue whether the weed resistance came mostly from this constant layering of fresh muck or from the structure of the Chinampas themselves. But now, when you're surrounded by water, it's much harder for airborne seeds to arrive, and those that do often land on a surface already covered by vigorous, densely planted crops. And either way, the result is a farmer's dream, lush growth with barely a stray sprout in sight. You kneel down and press your palm against the earth. It's cool and damp, as if it rained overnight, even though the sky has been clear for days. That's the other advantage of this recipe. It holds moisture so well but the plants almost never go thirsty. You picture your own backyard lawn, crispy and brown in summer, and feel a twinge of jealousy. Around you, the maize leaves rustle gently in the breeze, each stalk a pale green ladder stretching toward the sun. Beneath them, the beans climb slowly upward, twining around the maize like polite guests at a dance, while the squash sprawls across the base, its wide leaves shading the soil and making life miserable for would-be weeds. It's a quiet choreography, perfected over generations. The farmer hands you a small digging stick, a pointed length of polished wood, and shows you how to loosen the soil between plants. It's not to pull weeds, there aren't any, but to let air in and keep the ground from compacting. You work in silence for a while, the repetitive motion oddly meditative. Somewhere nearby, a duck quacks lazily from the canal, sounding for all the world like it's telling a joke it's told 100 times before. After a while, you notice something. The compost pile is never just left to sit. There's always someone turning it, mixing in new plant matter, keeping it alive. The smell is earthy and deep, not foul, as though the whole thing is breathing quietly. You realize this isn't just a soil recipe. It's a living system, with as much care put into feeding the ground as into feeding the people. You lean on your digging stick, looking across the water at other chinampas, their green edges glowing in the sun. A thought crosses your mind. Maybe the reason weeds don't thrive here isn't just the mud, or the water, or the layout. Maybe it's because these farmers don't give weeds a single chance to feel welcome. Every inch of soil is claimed, refreshed, shaded, and guarded, day after day. As the farmer reloads his canoe with fresh muck to take to another plot, you realize you're starting to understand the quiet genius of this place. It's not magic. It's not even luck. It's the careful layering of human effort and natural cycles, stitched together so tightly that weeds just don't fit in. The sun is higher now, throwing long, soft shadows across the rows. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a splash. Maybe a fish, maybe something larger. But here on the Chinampa, the only thing growing is what the farmers invite in. And that invitation list is very, very selective. You push off from the Chinampa and drift slowly down a narrow canal, the paddle dipping with a soft plop-pop into the greenish water. The air smells faintly of algae, with an undertone of something sweet. Perhaps the blossoms from the willow trees lining the banks. Their roots reach into the canal like a tangle of fingers, holding the edges firm against erosion. You run your hand along one, feeling the cool slickness of moss. The farmer beside you gestures toward the water, and you notice the slow, deliberate current moving between the chinampas. It's not fast enough to disturb the crops, but it's always moving, sliding around the floating fields like a quiet guardian. That's the secret, he explains with a shrug. The canals aren't just for transportation. They are part of the gardening itself. The water works like an ever-present helper. By surrounding the chinampas on all sides, it cuts off the weed migration routes that plague ordinary fields. Airborne seeds from distant plants may flutter down onto the water's surface, but most never make it across to dry ground. The ones that do try to sprout in the shallows face an unpleasant surprise. The water level is constantly shifting, sometimes drowning them before they can take root. Mainstream historians often describe chinampas as floating gardens, though in truth they are more like anchored islands. The surrounding canals act like both a moat and a mirror, reflecting light and keeping temperatures slightly more stable. You notice how the maize leaves nearest the water seem to stand taller, perhaps drinking in the reflected sunlight. Here's a quirky tidbit the farmer shares while skimming a bit of duckweed away from the canoe's prow. During certain times of year, Families would actually encourage water plants to grow thicker along the chinampa edges. Farm, marketing. Do you have that? The mats of greenery trapped floating seeds in debris, which were later scooped up and composted. It was, in its way, a weed trap that doubled as a fertilizer factory. But historians still argue whether the canals were originally dug for defense, irrigation, or pure agricultural design. Some believe they started as small ditches to manage seasonal flooding, slowly expanding into the intricate grid we see now. Others suggest that the Aztecs inherited much of the layout from earlier cultures and perfected it with their own engineering flair. Either way, by the time you're drifting along in this canoe, the system feels timeless. Or you lean over the edge and let your fingers trail in the water. It's surprisingly cool, with faint ripples that carry tiny insects skimming along the surface. Every so often, a fish breaks the stillness with a silver flash, sending rings of disturbance outward like slow-motion applause. The water's clarity changes from one stretch to another. Some canals are murky with stirred-up silt, others so clear you can see the patterns on the stones below. The farmer points out how the water also helps regulate soil moisture. Even in the heat of the dry season, the chinampas stay hydrated because the dampness seeps in from below. This constant moisture makes it hard for opportunistic weeds to get a stronghold. They might germinate, but their roots encounter a dense, oxygen-poor layer, not ideal for their survival. But what? The crops, meanwhile, thrive, with their roots comfortably drinking from a consistent supply. A gentle breeze picks up, carrying with it the sound of ducks quarreling somewhere behind you. Well, we might fall for the reach-in. The farmer laughs and says they're the real gardeners, because their paddling stirs up the shallows, keeping the water in motion and discouraging stagnant growth that could harbor unwanted plants. You picture a squad of feathery groundskeepers, each paid in freshwater snails and bits of maize. You pull up alongside another chinampa, where a young boy is bailing a bit of water from a canoe into the furrows of a vegetable bed. It's not random. He's targeting specific spots that need just a little extra moisture. End of chinampa. You watch as the water disappears into the soil almost instantly, leaving the surface darkened but not puddled. This micro-irrigation, repeated constantly by dozens of hands, keeps the entire network in perfect balance. As you continue gliding forward, the sun catches the ripples in a way that makes them sparkle. The scene is almost hypnotic: green fields, blue sky, and the gentle, ever-present sound of water moving, water feeding, water protecting. You start to understand that here, water is more than a resource. It's a partner in the work, a silent co-author of the weedless miracle you came to see. Somewhere ahead, a heron lifts from the bank in slow motion, its wings casting a moving shadow across your face. The farmer doesn't even pause his paddling. He's seen this dance every day of his life. I thought he'd be so safely passed by the rage of the fire jacket. You take a deep breath, letting the rhythm of paddle and current lull you, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, this watery embrace is the real reason the weeds never win. The sun climbs higher, softening the mist and casting a golden warmth across the chinampas. You feel it on your shoulders as you step from the canoe back onto a narrow earthen path. It's barely wide enough for two people to pass, lined with low mounds where maize stalks stand tall, their tassels catching the light like sleepy fireworks. Here, you're about to witness something subtle but genius: how the Aztec gardeners rotated their crops without ever stripping the soil bare or giving weeds the faintest opening. A man with sun-browned skin and a woven straw hat waves you over. He's standing beside 3 patches of earth, each a slightly different shade of green. You realize you're looking at a living calendar, each section planted in its own stage of the cycle. It's likely falling in London. Oh, why when I hit? The first patch bursts with young maize shoots, straight and confident. The next is thick with bean vines climbing upward, curling around slender poles. The last is dotted with low, sprawling squash plants, whose wide leaves shade almost every inch of soil. You crouch down and touch the ground beneath them. It's cool, damp, and nearly invisible under the leaf canopy. Even the most determined weed seed would struggle here, deprived of both sunlight and space. Mainstream historians point out that this Three Sisters method wasn't unique to the Aztecs. It appears across many indigenous farming traditions in the Americas. Maize provides a natural trellis, beans fix nitrogen into the soil, and squash acts as a living mulch. But here on the Chinampas, it's not just a clever trio, it's a rotation performed on water-fed plots that never lie empty. A quirky detail the farmer shares makes you smile. Sometimes, instead of moving all the crops to a new plot at once, they'd shift them in overlapping waves. So, while one corner of a chinampa transitioned from beans to squash, another was already switching squash to maize. This patchwork meant no weeds could ever see an opening across the entire bed. End quote. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs learned this overlapping rotation from older Mesoamerican farmers, or whether it evolved specifically in Chinampa culture. The constant moisture and small plot size might have encouraged the Aztecs to innovate in ways that upland farmers never needed to. Second, which is tact. You follow the farmer as he works along the rows, plucking the occasional yellowed leaf and dropping it into a small basket. These scraps will go straight into compost, which will in turn enrich next season's crops. Nothing sits idle here, not the soil, not the plants, not even the waste. The rotation is also seasonal choreography. In the cooler months, leafy greens take over certain plots, their shallow roots perfect for the damp topsoil. As temperatures rise, maize returns to dominate, drinking deep from the moisture-rich layers. In between, beans fill the role of both food source and soil healer. At one point, you notice a small, raised frame covered with reeds. Beneath it, tiny seedlings are sprouting in neat rows. The farmer explains that these are travelers, seedlings grown separately so they can be transplanted into a plot the very same day another crop is harvested. That means no bare soil for weeds to claim, not even overnight. You picture it like musical chairs, except the chairs are garden beds, and the music never stops. The air is filled with a blend of scents, fresh earth, faintly sweet bean blossoms, and the peppery aroma of squash stems. You hear the occasional plunk of a fish jumping in the nearby canal, a sound so regular it almost feels like part of the planting rhythm. As the farmer bends to check the bean vines, he hums a tune you don't recognize. It's slow, deliberate, and pairs perfectly with the work. You find yourself tapping your fingers along your leg, almost unconsciously syncing to the same beat. Maybe that's part of the magic. The rotation isn't just a method, it's a living pattern, woven into the daily movements, and even the songs of the people. By the time you step back onto the canoe, you started to see how these gardens are like a clock that never stops ticking. The hands move not in seconds, but in seasons, and weeds, they're simply not given the time. As you glide along the canal, the soft splash of your paddle mingling with distant bird calls, you notice a group of ducks and herons moving lazily across the water. Their reflections ripple gently in the early sunlight, creating a shimmer that makes the chinampas look almost dreamlike. You watch as the ducks dip their bills, snatching up stray seeds or tiny insects before they have a chance to root in the fertile soil. This is one of the most charming parts of Chinampa life, wildlife as unwitting assistants. The birds patrol the edges of the gardens, eating pests and preventing weeds from establishing themselves. You imagine a squad of feathery gardeners, each on duty 24 hours, and you can't help but smile. Occasionally, a heron stretches its long neck and gives a disapproving look, as if it's caught a seed in the wrong place. Mainstream historians often highlight human ingenuity in chinampa construction, but they sometimes overlook how the ecosystem itself participates. Ducks and other birds weren't just tolerated, they were integral to keeping the plots productive. Their presence reduced the need for constant manual weeding, freeing farmers to focus on planting and harvesting. Quirky detail. Some Aztec records hint at ritualized duck patrols, where farmers would ceremoniously release certain numbers of ducks onto new plots to bless them and maintain ecological balance. You might chuckle at the thought of ceremonial waterfowl, but these birds were surprisingly efficient. A well-fed duck could clear pests faster than a dozen gardeners with hoes. So, historians still argue whether these duck brigades were widespread tradition or localized practice among certain chinampa communities. Either way, observing them now, you can see why anyone would continue the practice. It works. You steer your canoe closer to one of the larger chinampas, where a heron is standing like a sentry. The farmer nudges it gently with a paddle, and the bird glides gracefully aside, landing a few meters down the canal. Mud, meat, cold. You watch as tiny, delicate waves fan out from its landing spot, shaking loose sediment and providing natural aeration for the water. The water around the plots hums with life. Dragonflies skim the surface, their wings catching the light. Tiny fish dart between reeds, eating whatever organic matter floats by. Even the occasional frog contributes, turning the soil in shallow areas and keeping algae growth in check. You start to notice a pattern. Every element of this ecosystem, from plant to animal, plays a role in maintaining the balance. Back on the chinampa, farmers bend over their crops, smiling as a duck waddles past, seemingly inspecting their work. You can almost hear the inner dialogue. Are these beans ready? Yes, excellent. The pest patrol agrees. It's impossible not to admire the effortless synergy of nature and human labor. Even more subtle is the timing. The birds feed at dawn and dusk, leaving the midday hours free for humans to work. We can go, replies the chin. Ducks and herons seem to know when to take their shifts, as if the rhythm of the lake itself dictates the schedule. You float in awe of this quiet orchestration. You lean forward, dipping a hand into the water, and feel the chill radiate up your arm. Tiny fish brush against your skin, probably wondering if you are edible or just another floating nuisance. The ripples spread outward, touching the base of the maize stalks and the edges of the squash leaves. And as you watch the water and wildlife move in harmony, you finally start to understand the genius of the chinampa system. This isn't just farming, it's ecosystem management, choreography, and artistry rolled into one. Every living creature has its role, and every role supports the plants. And through it all, the weeds, the perennial nuisance of gardens everywhere, are quietly, effectively kept at bay. You push the canoe onward, weaving between narrow canals that separate the chinampas, like tiny streets in a floating village. Each plot is meticulously organized, rows of maize, beans, and squash, forming geometric patterns that seem almost too perfect to be natural. You notice small wooden stakes marking certain corners, some with colored cough strips fluttering gently in the morning breeze. These aren't decorative, they indicate planting stages, harvest schedules, and sometimes even water levels. Mainstream histories often credit Chinampa's success to sheer human ingenuity, but standing here, it's clear that careful observation of natural processes was just as important. The Aztecs studied the lake for decades, noting how sediment settled, how water flowed, and how sunlight hit different plots at various times of year. This knowledge shaped every decision, from when to plant to which species to pair together. A quirky detail: farmers sometimes use the patterns of floating insects as indicators of soil fertility. If certain bugs were abundant near a plot, it meant the soil was rich. If absent, the patch might need extra compost or fresh sediment. You can't help but grin at the image of a gardener consulting a tiny insect council before planting. The farmer beside you gestures toward a small, sun-dappled corner where tiny seedlings are just breaking the surface. "See," he says softly, "we plant these early so they shade the soil before anything else can grow." Oh. You bend closer and notice how each sprout seems carefully spaced, leaving no empty soil patches. Nature doesn't get a chance here. Every inch is cleaned, nourished, and protected. You pause to watch a little girl, perhaps 8 or 9, carrying a basket of beans along a narrow canal path. She tiptoes carefully, balancing herself like an acrobat. You note how even the younger generation participates in this precise choreography. Farming isn't rushed. It's a series of slow, deliberate movements that respect the ecosystem. The canals themselves play another quiet role: fog. Their constant movement discourages weeds and allows nutrients to circulate. You trace a ripple across the water with your gaze, imagining the microscopic seeds and algae being carried along, filtered, and deposited in places that benefit the crops. It's almost like a natural irrigation and fertilization system, working in perfect sync with human hands. Quirky detail number 2. Sometimes, the Aztecs would sprinkle powdered minerals into the canals, believing it improves soil health. Modern science suggests these minerals could have slightly altered pH levels, benefiting certain crops over others. You smile at the thought that superstition and science danced together here centuries ago, hand in hand. Historians still argue how intentional some of these small interventions were. Were they early experiments in agrochemistry, or simply rituals passed down that coincidentally helped crops? Either way, you can see that nearly every action, whether adding compost, arranging seedlings, or consulting the ducks, contributed to a remarkable balance. As you drift further, the sun warms your face, and the scent of rich soil mixes with the sweet aroma of maize tassels. A dragonfly flits past, its wings catching light in iridescent flashes. You feel a gentle hum in the air, the subtle music of a thriving ecosystem. Here, in the middle of these floating gardens, it's easy to understand why weeds never really stood a chance. Everything is orchestrated, every layer, every movement, every creature in its proper place. You take a deep breath, savoring the calm, and realize that chinampas aren't just about food production. They're an entire philosophy of coexistence, of observation, patience, and subtle intervention. And as you glide past another lush plot, it becomes clear that this philosophy, repeated day after day, generation after generation, is what keeps these gardens thriving and perfectly weedless. The canoe drifts into a wider channel, where sunlight scatters across the water like glittering sugar. You lean back slightly, letting the rhythm of paddling lull your thoughts into quiet curiosity. All around you, chinampas stretch like a green mosaic, each plot a testament to patient care. You notice how even the edges are perfectly tidy. Not a stray vine or unwelcome sprout dares appear. The farmer tilts his head and gestures toward the base of a maize stalk. Tiny roots fan out in patterns that look almost artistic, intertwining with layers of compost and sediment. You kneel to inspect it more closely, feeling the firmness of the soil. Each layer is carefully constructed, bottom layers rich with decomposed vegetation, upper layers mixed with fresh lake mud, and the very surface sprinkled with tiny pebbles to hold moisture. What? I wish I had. This stratification not only nourishes the plants, but creates a physical barrier that most weeds can't penetrate. Mainstream historians often focus on the output, the 7 or 8 harvests a year, but here you see the quiet engineering behind it. Each layer of soil is deliberate, maintained season after season. The Aztecs understood that leaving the soil bare, even for a few days, would invite weeds. Instead, the chinampas remain continuously planted, continually refreshed, and rarely idle. A quirky detail: some farmers would plant small flowers, like marigolds or sunflowers, along the canal edges, ostensibly for beauty, but also for pest control and pollinator attraction. B.N. The flowers sometimes shade the water enough to keep floating seeds from germinating, so you're seeing dual-purpose landscaping, both aesthetic and functional. Historians still argue how systematically this was applied. Were flowers a standard feature of every chinampa, or were just a local custom adopted by certain families? Observing the delicate blooms swaying in the breeze, you suspect that wherever it was done, it probably caught on fast.
The sun warms your back as you glide past a plot where squash vines crawl lazily across the soil, leaves broad and shiny. You notice how the plants form a natural canopy, their large leaves pressing gently against the soil surface. Beneath, the dirt stays cool and shaded, almost like a soft pillow for the roots. Any weed seed that lands there would struggle to see enough sunlight to germinate, let alone thrive. You can't help but smile at the ingenuity. You imagine a modern gardener staring at this and exclaiming, "How does no weed ever grow here?" The answer is in the layering, the shading, the constant refreshment of the soil, and, of course, the water that surrounds it on all sides. It's a fortress against unwanted growth, made from mud, plant matter, and patience.
A heron lands nearby. Stepping carefully along the edge of the canal, it pauses to fish, causing small ripples in the otherwise calm water. You watch as it dips its beak gracefully and emerges with a tiny catch. 1. Tenki rocks. In its own quiet way, the bird is part of this careful equilibrium, helping to maintain balance and keeping potential pests in check. You notice the farmer adjusting a row of beans, weaving them carefully around the maize stalks. 1. Tenki rocks. See how we give them support without leaving bare soil, he murmurs. You crouch and watch, noting how every plant is intertwined, shading soil and blocking sunlight from reaching any opportunistic weeds. Even the smallest gaps are covered with temporary seedlings, ready to fill in the moment a space opens. Floating here, you start to grasp the sheer genius of continuous planting. Nothing is left unattended, nothing is neglected. The soil never lies fallow, the roots always occupy space, and weeds? Well, weeds simply never get invited to the party. It's subtle, it's beautiful, and it's entirely effective. I'm not far away from this party. The sun has moved higher now, casting a warm, golden haze across the chinampas. You feel the gentle heat on your arms as you step from the canoe onto a narrow path lined with maize and bean vines. The air hums with quiet life. Dragonflies flit overhead, leaves rustle in a slow breeze, and somewhere a heron lets out a low call. You inhale deeply, savoring the earthy vegetal scent that fills the air. Here, you're about to witness another subtle trick of the Aztec gardeners, microtopographic. As you walk along the chinampa, you notice slight ridges and mounds separating each planting row. The scent, to the casual observer, these might seem accidental or merely practical for walking, but each mound serves a purpose. They manage water flow, prevent soil compaction, and create tiny pockets where plants can anchor roots safely. Even more, these mounds help channel nutrients from decomposing organic matter directly toward the roots. leaving less chance for weeds to exploit open space. Open space. Mainstream historians often emphasize the productivity of chinampas, without explaining the microengineering involved. These raised beds were carefully constructed, with exact proportions designed over decades of trial and error. The Aztecs understood subtle gradients in soil moisture, sunlight, and airflow, and used them to their advantage. A quirky detail: some chinampa gardeners added small bits of crushed pottery or shells into the ridges. Supposedly, it helped mark rows and deter pests, but it also improved drainage and slightly increased mineral content. Whether the shells actually warded off weeds or were just decorative, the effect was a happy coincidence: stronger, healthier crops with minimal manual intervention. Historians still argue whether microtopography was a conscious design or an evolved practice refined over generations. Either way, walking along these raised beds, you can see how every contour, every mound, every shallow trench is part of a master plan to keep soil healthy and weeds at bay. You crouch down, letting your fingers brush across the damp, crumbly soil. It feels alive, teeming with microorganisms and moisture, yet dense enough to resist unwanted seeds. Tiny rootlets from surrounding plants snake through the surface, forming an interlocking network that further discourages competition. You begin to understand how every element is interconnected, from water flow to plant placement to the tiniest microbial inhabitant. The farmer beside you points toward a small canal branch, where water trickles in gently from the main channel. Powers cause closer to others. We let the water guide us, he says. It's not just for irrigation. It tells us where to plant, where to refresh, and where to leave space for young seedlings. You watch as tiny ripples carry leaf litter and nutrients downstream, feeding the edges of the plot. The rotation of crops, the raised beds, and the constant water management combine into a seamless strategy that discourages weeds without requiring constant intervention. And you can't help but admire the foresight. It's subtle, quiet, and profoundly effective. A dragonfly lands on a beanstalk nearby, its iridescent wings flickering in the sunlight. You watch it for a moment, feeling a calm curiosity wash over you. Everything here has a role, a rhythm, a place. And weeds? They simply don't fit in. You follow the narrow canal as it curves gently, the paddle dipping rhythmically into the water, each stroke producing a soft, almost hypnotic plop. The sun is now higher, warming the leaves of maize, beans, and squash until they glimmer in pale green light. You take a deep breath, letting the sense of moist earth and ripening crops fill your senses. You begin to notice the small details that make chinampas so remarkably resistant to weeds. One subtle feature is the strategic layering of plants themselves. Taller crops like maize act as natural umbrellas for the lower growing beans and squash, shading the soil beneath. This constant canopy discourages sunlight-loving weeds from germinating. You bend down and brush a finger along the soil, cool, dark, and slightly spongy from recent irrigation. A weed would struggle to find enough light or space to get started. Mainstream historians often focus on the output of chinampas, several harvests per year, but less attention is given to this intricate choreography of plant placement. Each row, each plant, each vine is arranged to maximize growth while minimizing opportunity for invasive species. The system relies on knowledge passed down for generations, honed through observation, trial, and careful experimentation. Quirky detail: some farmers would even use small, brightly painted sticks to mark microzones of planting. According to oral tradition, the colors corresponded to specific stages of growth or energy levels of the soil. Modern observers might call it superstition, but it had a practical effect. It helped gardeners remember rotation schedules and prevented gaps where weeds could sneak in. And historians still argue whether these color-coded markers were standard practice across the empire, or limited to specific communities, but the method illustrates how attentive and precise Chinampa farmers were. You start to understand that every small action is part of a larger pattern, a living, breathing, self-maintaining system. A heron glides across the canal, landing gracefully on a corner of a Chinampa. Its reflection shimmers in the water like a slow-motion echo. You watch as it moves carefully among the plants, its long legs brushing lightly against leaves without disturbing the soil. Even the local wildlife seems to respect the careful design. Ducks and smaller birds pick insects and pests without damaging the main crops, acting as unpaid assistants in this intricate dance. And the farmer gestures toward a low mound covered in young seedlings. "See how we keep the soil covered at all times," he says. "There's never an open patch. We plant, cover, and refresh continuously." You crouch down and notice the tiny sprouts filling every available space, leaves brushing against one another. The principle is simple yet profound. No bare soil, no opportunity for weeds. You follow him along the rows, noting how every plant intertwines with its neighbors. Beans climb maize stalks, squash leaves spread across the ground, small flowering plants edge the canals. Everything has a purpose: shade, nutrition, pest control, and space occupation. It's subtle engineering in living form, perfected over centuries. As you pause to rest on a small bench carved from a single piece of wood, the hum of insects and rustle of leaves forms a gentle backdrop. And you begin to understand the genius of the Chinampa. It is a system where nothing is wasted, nothing is idle, and weeds simply never get a chance. And as your gaze sweeps across the floating gardens, it's almost magical how effortless it seems. Those centuries of care and observation made it possible. The gentle hum of water beneath the canoe seems to set a steady rhythm as you drift along the wider canal. You notice the way sunlight dances across the ripples, throwing speckles of gold onto the lush green of the Chinampas. Everything feels deliberate here, as if the gardens themselves are breathing in time with the lake. You lean forward and watch a farmer tending to a row of maize. His hands move slowly but with precision, carefully teasing apart leaves and adjusting small support sticks. Even without being told, you understand that this isn't just maintenance, it's choreography. How each gesture, each movement, keeps the soil covered, the plants thriving, and the weeds at bay. Mainstream historians often emphasize Chinampa's productivity or engineering, but the subtlety of their ongoing care is equally remarkable. The farmer's attention to micro-conditions, soil moisture, sunlight exposure, and plant spacing, prevents weeds before they even think of germinating. You brush a finger along the soil. It's rich, damp, and surprisingly compact, yet full of life. It feels almost self-regulating. A quirky fact emerges. Some Aztec families would float small trays of seedlings on the canals overnight. These mobile nurries allowed them to transplant new plants into any vacant spaces the following day. The floating seedlings also discouraged weeds by occupying space temporarily, leaving no open patches of soil. You can't help but grin at the idea of mini floating gardens, ferrying young crops like passengers. The quirky fact is the seeds that stay within 5 leaves. Historians still debate whether these floating seedling practices were widespread or localized to certain neighborhoods of Tenochtitlan. Either way, the principle is clear. Constant coverage and thoughtful placement prevent weeds from gaining a foothold. You glide past a canal lined with willow trees, their roots dangling into the water like natural trellises. The farmer explains that these roots serve multiple purposes: stabilizing the banks, filtering debris, and providing shade that moderates soil temperature. You notice how the shaded soil beneath the willows seems even more resistant to stray seedlings. A heron pauses nearby, tilting its head as if inspecting your canoe. Ducks paddle past, skimming up insects. Every creature in this watery ecosystem participates in maintaining balance. It's a network of life, finely tuned to protect the crops and ensure minimal human intervention for weeding. The farmer points to a small patch where bean vines have intertwined with maize stalks, creating a dense canopy. "Nothing grows underneath but what we plant," he says. You crouch and examine the tiny seedlings below. Their spacing is perfect, each leaf shading the next, leaving no room for intruders. It's like watching a natural barricade in motion. As you drift further along, the breeze carries the faint scent of ripening squash, mixed with the earthy aroma of wet soil. The scene is almost hypnotic: layered vegetation, calm water, birds on patrol, and humans moving in gentle rhythm. You begin to appreciate that the Chinampa's weed-free status isn't magic. It's a combination of observation, timing, layering, and subtle integration with the environment. By the time you rest your paddle and let the canoe float freely, it's clear that these gardens operate on a principle of continuous occupation. Next, ICCF. There's always a plant covering soil, always water circulating, always life interacting to preserve order. In this serene system, weeds are the unwelcome guests who never find an open door. The afternoon sun now casts long, lazy shadows across the Chinampas, and the gentle lapping of water against the canoe soothes your senses. You watch as the farmer bends carefully over a patch of squash, tucking in leaves and trimming small, yellowed stems. Even these tiny adjustments serve a purpose, maintaining a canopy of foliage that keeps sunlight off the soil, denying weeds the chance to grow. Mainstream historians often celebrate the Aztec mastery of Chinampa construction, but standing here, it becomes clear that the daily gentle maintenance was just as critical. The rotation of crops, the careful placement of seedlings, and the continuous coverage of soil, all of these elements combine into a living strategy that keeps unwanted plants out without ever needing a hoe. Quirky detail: some farmers would occasionally plant small aromatic herbs in between crops, not only for flavor, but because the strong scent deterred certain insect pests. The herbs also covered bare soil, providing another subtle barrier to weeds. You can almost imagine a tiny lavender army marching along the rows, protecting their neighbors silently and efficiently. Historians still argue about how much of this practice was ritualized versus purely practical. Whether for ceremonial reasons, superstition, or practical pest control, the effect was the same. Weeds were minimized, crops thrived, and the gardens remained orderly. You drift toward a wider canal and notice the reflection of the surrounding greenery in the still water. Hansen, the sight is so calming that your eyelids begin to feel heavier, and you realize the environment itself seems designed to soothe both body and mind. Even the constant buzz of insects is rhythmic, almost musical, blending with the water and bird calls. The farmer points to a series of small mounds near the canal's edge. "These are for young maize," he explains. "We plant here first, so they grow under partial shade, then move them to the main plot when they're strong enough." You kneel and touch the soil, noticing the tiny roots already starting to anchor themselves. By keeping the soil covered at all times, from seedling to mature plant, the Aztecs cleverly removed any window of opportunity for weeds. You observe the interactions between plants, noticing how bean vines twist around maize stalks, creating vertical layers that maximize space while leaving no horizontal gaps. The broad leaves of squash spread across the ground like a natural mulch, shading the soil and conserving moisture. It's a choreography perfected over generations, where every plant has its role, and weeds are denied a single moment of advantage. A small heron lands nearby, shaking off water from a quick dip. Ducks paddle past lazily, snatching insects. Every creature is part of this dynamic system, participating in a centuries-old design that balances productivity, biodiversity, and weed control. You can't help but marvel at the subtle genius that blends ecology, engineering, and daily care into something so elegant and effective. Even as you relax into the rhythm of the gardens, you notice that no soil is ever truly exposed. Ecolaza piece has covered everything.
Wherever you look, life is actively covering space, whether in the form of young seedlings, sprawling vines, or purposeful mulch. The strategy is simple. Keep the soil claimed, and weeds won't even get a chance to try.
The late afternoon casts a gentle glow across the Chinampas, softening the edges of leaves and rippling water alike. You pause to admire the reflections of maize tassels and bean vines dancing on the surface of the canal. Everything seems suspended in time, moving slowly, deliberately, as if the gardens themselves breathe in sync with the lake. Here, you notice the subtle artistry of plant height management. Taller crops, like maize, not only provide a canopy for lower plants, but also create miniature windbreaks, reducing soil erosion and discouraging weed seeds from being blown into the plots. The farmer gestures toward a row of bean vines spiraling up the stalks, explaining how the interlacing of stems creates a living lattice, leaving no vertical or horizontal gaps for intruders. Mainstream historians point to Chinampa's efficiency and high yields, yet many underestimate the visual and structural intelligence embedded in these gardens. Each plant is carefully positioned not only for sunlight and nutrition, but also for continuous soil coverage, effectively outsmarting weeds without modern tools. Quirky detail: some farmers planted small flowering plants along canal edges, not just for pollinators, but because their seeds attracted certain insects that preyed on pests. You can almost picture a tiny ecosystem of mini bodyguards, patrolling the borders, keeping trouble at bay. Historians still argue whether these border flowers were widespread or symbolic, yet their functional effect on soil health and pest control is undeniable. You bend to touch the moist, rich earth beneath the sprawling squash leaves, noting its density and resilience. Any unwelcome plant would struggle to establish itself here. As you glide further along the canal, a heron dips gracefully for a small fish, sending tiny ripples across the reflective water. Ducks follow nearby, their quiet splashes adding rhythm to the afternoon. You realize that even the wildlife plays a supporting role in maintaining the balance. Insects are eaten, seeds are monitored, and the water moves gently, carrying nutrients while discouraging unwanted growth. The farmer points to a small mound of seedlings near a canal bend. "We always plant some here first," he murmurs, "so they cover the soil immediately. Nothing waits bare." You crouch, observing the dense coverage, tiny sprouts already shading the moist dirt. In this system, soil never lies empty. There's always a living cover, whether from plants, roots, or carefully placed mulch. You begin to notice the rhythm in the work itself. Farmers move slowly, deliberately, hands brushing against leaves without disturbing them. The planting, trimming, and weaving of vines is almost ceremonial, a kind of gentle dance designed to nurture the crops while continuously defending the soil. By the time you lean back, letting the canoe drift lazily, it's clear that the Chinampa system's genius lies not in dramatic innovations, but in constant, thoughtful care. At every plant, every mound, every bird, and every ripple in the water contributes to a living, breathing, and remarkably self-maintaining garden, where weeds never stand a chance. The sun now hangs low, casting a warm amber glow that glints off the canal waters, and you feel the day's gentle heat settling into your shoulders. You drift slowly past a series of interconnected chinampas, their leafy canopies merging into a continuous quilt of green. You notice how each plot, while unique, seems to follow the same principles: soil constantly covered, plants layered carefully, water circulating gently. The harmony of it all has a calming effect, as though the gardens themselves are exhaling alongside you. Mainstream historians often marvel at the productivity of chinampas, but sometimes overlook this continuous attentiveness. It isn't just construction or irrigation that keeps weeds at bay. It's the rhythm of care, the delicate balance of coverage and shade, that quietly enforces order. You watch as the farmer carefully rotates a young squash vine into position, tucking it alongside sprawling bean leaves, and realize that the soil is never exposed. Not even a tiny patch is left unclaimed. A quirky detail: some Aztec gardeners would place small fragments of volcanic rock along the edges of plots, partly as a marker, but also because the porous material subtly moderated soil moisture, reducing chances for unwanted weeds to germinate. You can imagine tiny rocky sentinels standing guard along the rows, silently protecting the crops. Historians still debate the extent to which such practices were ritualistic versus purely practical, but the outcome is undeniable. Soil is kept continuously occupied, the microclimate remains favorable, and weeds never get the upper hand. As you glide along, you see a small heron preening along a canal edge, its feathers glinting in the low sun. Ducks paddle past lazily, while dragonflies zigzag over the surface, their reflections flickering like moving light. Fat, flack. You begin to notice the subtle interplay. Water circulation keeps the soil aerated, animals feed on pests, and every plant covers the ground, leaving nothing for intruders. Even the smallest ripple contributes to a thriving system. The farmer points out a tiny, almost hidden row of flowering herbs nestled between squash and beans. These help attract pollinators, he explains, and keep some insects away. They cover small gaps too. You kneel, examining how the blooms shade soil and integrate seamlessly with the surrounding crops. It's a masterclass in multifunctional planting: aesthetic, practical, and protective, all at once. You drift further, the soft splash of your paddle blending with distant bird calls. The gentle scent of ripening maize, damp soil, and faint herbs fills the air, and you realize that the chinampas operate like a living, breathing organism. Every element, plant, animal, water, soil, is synchronized, and weeds, in this finely tuned system, they simply never find a foothold. By now, your eyelids feel heavier, your body relaxing into the soft rhythm of the gardens. You lean back slightly, letting the scene wash over you. These floating gardens, nurtured by generations of careful observation and quiet labor, reveal a subtle, unassuming genius. Life organized so perfectly that even the slightest intruder has no chance to disrupt it. The last rays of the sun gild the canal waters in soft gold, and the chinampas seem to glow as if illuminated from within. You drift slowly, allowing the rhythmic sound of water lapping against the canoe to lull your senses. Often, all of the explosions had always been. The rows of maize and beans form perfect mosaics, their leaves rustling softly in the evening breeze. You notice how, even in this fading light, every inch of soil remains covered, every plant in its place, and weeds are nowhere to be seen. Mainstream historians often highlight the technological ingenuity of chinampas, but standing here, it's impossible not to notice the quiet, continuous care that defines them. Each plant is thoughtfully placed, every seedling timed and spaced to leave no room for intrusion. The very architecture of the gardens, layered soil, raised beds, interwoven crops, ensures that weeds are outmaneuvered at every turn. A quirky detail: some gardeners used to float tiny bundles of moss or straw in the canals overnight, not just for compost, but as a subtle soil shield. Modern observers might call it an early form of mulching, and it effectively prevented stray seeds from taking root in bare patches. You can almost picture the floating bundles drifting gently, like miniature guardians, silently maintaining order. Historians still debate how universally these practices were applied across Tenochtitlan and its surrounding regions. Was every plot maintained with this precision, or did certain families innovate these methods and others adapted over time? And of 7, 148. Nonetheless, the principle holds. Continuous coverage and mindful placement meant that weeds rarely stood a chance. As twilight deepens, you notice the wildlife settling in. A heron stretches one leg while tucking its beak into soft feathers. Ducks drift lazily past, and dragonflies hover above the canal, their wings catching the last glimmers of light. Even these creatures are part of the subtle balance, helping maintain pest populations and encouraging healthy soil and plant growth. The farmer glides alongside you, pointing out a final detail: tiny mounds of new seedlings ready to be transplanted. "We always keep the soil busy," he whispers. "Every inch has a purpose." You lean forward, inspecting the dense arrangement, young plants already creating shade, leaving no space for weeds to sneak in. You feel a sense of calm admiration for this centuries-old design, marveling at how life and care are intertwined to create a self-maintaining ecosystem. Your paddle stirs the water gently, and the faint aroma of maize, herbs, and moist soil drifts through the air. You realize that the genius of Chinampas is in this harmonious integration: soil, water, plants, and animals functioning together to sustain abundance with minimal intervention. And as darkness slowly descends, you feel the soft serenity of these floating gardens, a system perfected through patience, observation, and subtle ingenuity. Weeds never had a chance, and somehow, that thought itself is comforting. The calm deepens, and your senses gradually soften into the rhythmic pulse of the gardens. You begin to notice the gentle sway of water, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, the slow rustling of leaves, and your own relaxed breathing. The world seems suspended, and the Chinampas, alive, layered, and entirely weed-free, invite you to drift into a gentle, undisturbed sleep. Now, as the last glow of the sun fades, let your mind settle on the idea of continuous care, subtle observation, and quiet harmony. Imagine the soft water, the interlaced plants, and the gentle rhythm of life, and let your breathing sync with this ancient cadence. Drift along the canals, feel the cool, damp air on your skin, hear the quiet music of leaves and birds, and allow the calm to wash over you. The Chinampas are a living lullaby, a testament to patient ingenuity and the quiet beauty of nature, carefully tended. Feel your eyelids growing heavier, your breathing slowing, your mind unwinding. Let the tranquility of this ancient floating world settle into your senses. The Chinampas continue their gentle work, the water continues to flow, and you, wrapped in the calm embrace of this moment, are invited to follow their rhythm into a deep, restorative sleep. Drift softly now, and allow the quiet genius of these gardens to guide you into dreams filled with green leaves, flowing water, and the peaceful hum of life perfectly in balance. The sky has darkened now, and the Chinampas are bathed in the soft silver of moonlight. You feel the gentle sway of the water beneath your canoe, a rhythmic pulse that carries you further into calm. Soon, the leaves rustle slowly, the distant croak of frogs punctuates the night, and every sound seems to blend into a soothing lullaby. Let your body sink into the comfort of this slow, deliberate world, where every plant, every ripple, and every creature has its place, its role, and its purpose. You might notice the subtle scents of ripening maize, damp soil, and flowering herbs, faint yet grounding, drawing you into the quiet harmony of the gardens. Let each inhalation remind you of the care and attention that has gone into creating this landscape, the patient choreography that keeps weeds from ever disturbing the serenity. Leaves are every inch of soil is occupied, every root is entwined with another. Every living being plays its part in this gentle, self-metering ecosystem. The water moves softly, carrying reflections of leaves and stars alike, and the world feels both expansive and intimate at once. Imagine drifting down these canals, the cool breeze brushing your face, the faint hum of nocturnal life surrounding you, as if the gardens themselves are singing you toward rest. The subtle balance of human ingenuity, natural rhythms, and quiet observation becomes a soft, persistent melody,